When it comes to lifting loads, there's a lot riding on it. There are lives at stake, of workers, of people nearby, of people who are the load, to say nothing of the value of other loads should anything go wrong. The safety of lifting equipment hinges on its weakest link, and when this includes any work equipment used for lifting or lowering loads, plus any attachments used to anchor, fix or support them, the number of links in the chain are enormous. When you're working with lifting equipment, there are regulations and associated guidelines you need to follow. These have been introduced to minimize risk to personal health and safety, not just to those working with the equipment, but people living and working nearby. In the UK, this is LOLA, the Lifting Operations and Lifting Equipment Regulations 1998. These repeal the previous Construction Lifting Operations Regulations. LOLA works in conjunction with the Health and Safety at Work Act, the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations, and PURE 98. Under the regulations, companies and individuals are legally liable if anything goes wrong. So that applies to employers, the self-employed, whether a business or a trade, whether for profit or not. If you use, supervise, manage or control lifting equipment, that means you, whether you provide the equipment or not. When it comes to using your lifting equipment, it must first and foremost be positioned or installed so it's as safe as possible.
Okay, now if you can drive in here,
Yes.
park up roughly in the middle there, we need to pick up the toilet block and move it about 5 metres that way.
To the right, yes,
That's
okay.
fine.
I've got you. I'll just have a look over here to see where it's going to go.
This essential preparation minimizes the risks of things going amiss, like the lifting equipment or load hitting someone or something. Where appropriate, the importance of outriggers cannot be underestimated, especially in soft and wet conditions. And the fitting of a safety catch on a hook will prevent a load free falling or being accidentally released. And when you have a load that needs moving, it's not just a case of lift or lower away. The task must be properly planned by a competent person, appropriately supervised, and carried out in a safe manner.
Yeah, I think we can manage that, no problem, you mate.
You need to conduct a risk assessment before you set about your task, using the principles of risk prevention. Avoid, evaluate those you can't avoid, adapt, replace, and combat at source. For lifting equipment, you need to consider how often the lifting equipment will be used, where it will be used, the type of load that's to be lifted, its weight, shape, center of gravity, availability of lifting points, and any limitations specified by the manufacturer or supplier. You also need to look at the caliber of your workers. Are they experienced and well trained? But onto the task. The operator needs to be able to get to and from the equipment safely. Where they're working needs to be big enough and strong enough for them and any items needed in the space. Clearly, you should minimize risks of accidents from slips, trips and falls. Barriers and non-slip surfaces become vital. You should consider the consequences if workers do fall, either from a height or into dangerous substances. Take scissor lifts, for example. They can operate at considerable heights. And of course, don't forget anyone working or passing beneath the lifting equipment and its load. And make sure you take precautions against lifting equipment tilting overturning, moving, slipping or collapsing to the ground. The care required to level any equipment cannot be overemphasized. A few moments of fine adjustment could save a life. With cranes especially, high winds can cause problems, so keep a check on them, both on board and at ground level. Keep well clear of obstacles above, below and around you. Remember power cables, and assess all the risks and take appropriate precautions to eliminate or control them, not just for normal operations, but for maintenance and inspection as well. It sounds like common sense, but when you're the one who's responsible if anything goes wrong, you need to be doubly certain by having safe work systems in place. Stark images of failure during a lifting operation. It's the employer's responsibility to make sure lifting equipment is strong enough and stable enough for each load. Continuing on the weakest link principle, you have to make sure that your equipment is strong and every load-bearing part and any attachment that's involved in the lifting is up to the task. Pay special attention to stress at mounting or fixing points. And don't forget to take into account things like, say, the weight of the hook block and the shock loading of drag and swing if you lift a load that's not directly under the point of lift. It's not just about strength either. There's stability. There's no point in having the strongest machine if it's going to topple over. Make sure your equipment is stabilized to cope with the maximum load. Ensure you use sufficient padding, and make sure you take the condition of the ground into account. If your lifting equipment's on rails, pay special attention to anything that could cause a derailment, loose material, or misaligned rails. It's best to examine the track thoroughly and not to assume the wheels will push rubbish away.
Right, Arthur. All right, take it in.
And if your mobile lifting equipment is fitted with pneumatic tires, check that their pressure's right on every wheel for the load you intend to lift. All machinery and accessories for lifting loads must be clearly marked to indicate their safe working loads. If this depends on the machine's configuration, it has to be marked accordingly, in this case to allow for people and other types of loads. If this is too complicated, the information must at least be kept with the machine, and it has to be crystal clear just what the safe working load for each configuration is. Your lifting accessories too must be marked in such a way that it's clear what needs to be done for their safe use. If your lifting equipment is designed for lifting people, it must be clearly marked. If it's not designed for lifting people, and if there's any chance someone might mistakenly use it for lifting people, the equipment should be marked to show that persons should not be carried.
It's not safe, is it?
Yeah, okay,
Yeah? Right.
At fault, both the driver and rider. If your equipment is for lifting people, it's carrying an invaluable load, so needs extra safeguards. Protective devices, so anyone using it doesn't fall off and isn't crushed, trapped or hit. A vital piece here is the harness, worn and securely fixed to a strong point on the carrier, not the structure being worked on. These devices need to work not just when the operator is being lifted, but as far as possible while they're working from the carrier as well.
Excuse me, mate. Can you bring me down on auxiliary power? All my power's off up here.
Yeah, okay, mate.
The other thing with people lifting equipment is that if something goes wrong and someone's trapped on board, You must have safeguards in place so that they're not exposed to danger and can be freed easily. Every step of the way, you need to make sure your lifting equipment is up to scratch in the safety department, from the time you take the equipment on until the moment it leaves your control. This may involve regular, thorough examinations. If so, you'll need a competent, trained examiner to carry out the examination in accordance with an appropriate procedure. You'll find details of what's required in the new Code of Practice. Before you use your lifting equipment for the first time, you need to ask yourself, has it been used before? Is it missing its latest required examination report? If you've answered yes to either of these questions, your lifting equipment must be thoroughly examined for any defect before you start it up. If a crane hire company erects, say, a tower crane on a site, it must issue a copy of the last examination report with the crane. Then once it's installed and before use, the crane must be thoroughly examined by a competent person. This will normally be done by the hire company, particularly if they erect the crane. Similarly, if lifting equipment is installed or reassembled and safety hinges on the way this has been done, it needs to be thoroughly examined before being used again.
All right, that completes that inspection and test. Any problems at all?
No, it's all right.
No?
That's
Sure?
to me, yeah.
Fine, okay then, we'll sign the form off, we'll keep a copy, you keep this one on site.
And that all-important signature completes the examination. Remember, don't buy, sell, take on, or give away any lifting equipment without physical proof that its last thorough examination required under the regulations has been done.
So you think you'd be interested in these machines at £200 a piece?
Yeah, I could be. Have you got all the lifting and inspection certificates to hand?
No, you don't need anything like that. They're near
You don't
enough
need
the way
them?
they are.
Oh, I thought you did. I think I'd better leave it then.
Aye, okay.
Okay.
That's what you want.
Thank you.
A very wise decision, especially if the lifting equipment's been exposed to conditions causing deterioration. By the very nature of their size or tasks, lifting equipment is often exposed to such conditions. If this deterioration is liable to result in dangerous situations, the equipment and its accessories need to be thoroughly examined on a regular basis. It's the only way to ensure health and safety conditions are maintained and any deterioration detected and remedied in good time. Under these circumstances, your lifting equipment will need to be thoroughly examined at least every 12 months. Lifting accessories and people lifting equipment will need to be examined every 6 months. And if something goes wrong that could jeopardize the safety of the lifting equipment, have it examined before it's used again. Your examiner needs to make a signed written report of his examination and submit it to the employer and to any person you've hired or leased the gear from. Schedule 1 of the regulations outlines what needs to be in the report, but it should indicate the condition of the equipment, including any defects and time limits on repairs. If there's a defect that poses imminent danger, the examiner needs to send the report higher. So if the equipment's been hired or leased, it needs to go to the Health and Safety Executive. If it's your own equipment, the report will go to the relevant enforcing authority, such as the Environmental Health Department of your local authority or your own factory inspector. Then it's up to the employer to make sure the equipment is not used again until it's fixed. And don't forget to keep the report on file. So there you are, whether you're reaching new heights or moving mountains. When you work within your regulations and guidelines, you can lift with confidence, knowing that each and every link in the lifting chain is solid, reliable, and above all, as safe as it possibly can be.